We're going to jump right into a campfire story because I just can't help myself. And the story starts like this. It's a Friday afternoon, maybe 4:30 Eastern time, high summer. And all across America, moms and dads and grandparents and long-lost college roommates and friends of all sorts are gathering the people that they love most. They're piling into RVs, they're hooking up campers, they're throwing tents in the backs of battered pickups, and they are driving to their selected weekend destinations. And on the other side of those back roads are a bunch of campground owners waiting to check them in and figure out who goes where and sell them firewood and all of the things that we just forget to think about when we're actually going camping. And that's going great. And then a dozen developer screens scattered around Metro Denver, 3 ominous bouncing dots start going. I heard a laugh in the production Slack channel. And when those bouncing dots stop, an account manager has written something terrifying because all it says is, hey, production is running slow. Can someone check? And just like that, all of the developers who were hoping to log out early on a Friday are no longer thinking that. And they're scrambling around a dozen different dashboards. They're going through hundreds of thousands of data points. They are trying to pull a story from this sea of data. 5 minutes go by. 10 minutes go by. And if this were a real campfire, this is where I would jump out and scare you because it's scary to not know what's going on in your system. How did we get here? How did we get out of it? And possibly of interest, who the heck am I? My name's Kristen Smith. I'm the DevOps services lead at a startup called Campspot. We work with both campground owners and with campers looking to find their next campsite. I'm not funny enough for Twitter, but I do pretty good on LinkedIn. And one of the favorite pieces of my job at Campspot, besides, cool tech and cool people, is that we get to work with all sorts of different types of campgrounds. One of my favorite subsections of parks that I get to work with are what are known as dark sky parks. And if you're looking at this slide, they are great for stargazing. They're located in areas with incredibly low levels of light pollution. And there are only a few in the United States that are recognized by the International Dark Sky Organization, which is kind of the steward of this movement called the Dark Sky Movement. Here is a terrifying fact for your Tuesday afternoon. 96% of the global population in 2022 cannot walk outside their home and see the natural sky. That goes up to 99% in the United States. That's 96% of the global population that is cut off to some degree from the stars that helped us circumnavigate the planet as a species, right? These balls of burning gas, shout out to Disney, spawned some of the most enduring mythology of our shared human history. And we've put so much light in the sky that we can't see that. But you know what's really cool about light pollution? It's reversible. You know how you fix it? You turn off lights, right? And that's a technical solution. And as we've heard over and over and over during this conference, we don't live in technical systems, we live in socio-technical systems. And so some social solutions have come out of the dark sky movement, right? These are things you may have seen in your lifetime, the switch from white lights to yellow lights, or motion detected lights outside your house, or shielding lights so that you only see what you're intending to illuminate and light doesn't scatter into the atmosphere. For context, that's called light trespass, which I find an incredibly adorable term. But for this talk, we're going to talk specifically about the top two here. 2 types of light pollution that are, I think, directly applicable to alert pollution, and these are clutter, which is when there are too many direct sources of light and your eye doesn't know where to settle, right? Think of like driving down the Las Vegas Strip. What do you focus on? And the other one is sky glow, which is maybe more insidious. Sky glow is the overall brightening of the sky by all of these indirect sources of light. So if you think about it, this is, if you want to see a constellation in the sky, it depends on two factors. It's the brightness of the stars and the darkness of the background. And you need that contrast to be able to pull the stars from the sky. So think about those as we go through this today. I told you I would tell you how we got into this mess, so it might help to know a little bit about the history of Campspot. I was lucky enough to join in January of 2020, and I say lucky because there's one tent up here. That tent represents the first 100 parks that were using our business-to-business software. That was our only product that we offered at the time. Over the course of the pandemic, outdoor hospitality boomed. I had no idea, I literally just looked into it. On the right, July of 2021, these 10 tents here, that represents 1,000 parks on the system, right? So 10 times change in about 18 months. As you might guess, we had similar changes in personnel. When I joined, there were about 40 of us, kind of split evenly between the technical side of the house and the business side of the house, people who go out and talk to people, get them to join the software, and people who support them as they continue their journey with us. In July of 2021, we're approaching that 100 employee mark, which is very cool. But it also meant that more than half of our engineers were brand new. They hadn't seen how the system was built. They had absolutely no idea where the skeletons were buried. In terms of applications, for the sake of argument, let's say we had 3 in January of 2020 and in July of 2021. If you've ever worked in a growing business, we didn't just scale those 3, right? So we introduced a new thing and that took off, and a couple other things did well and a couple other things didn't. So by early summer, when I say early summer, I mean right about now, of 2021, we had more load on the system, right, those 1,000 parks. We had more systems in general to maintain, and we had more new devs with less experience. We started having incidents, customer-facing incidents. It didn't feel good. It's never just 1 or 2. You just wait for the next one to come. And if anybody's ever operated in this type of environment, that's incredibly stressful. And what's worse is thinking about that campfire story. When things did happen, it felt like this. We could see that there was a problem. You can see the moon even on a really cloudy night, but we couldn't see any further down. We couldn't get any more detail. It was really hard to pull the story out of the data. So we did what we knew how to do. We did what we knew from our previous roles and from the existing monitoring and alerting that was in place, which is we put spotlights on stuff. We went back and we looked at all of our old incidents. We said, hey, you know what we have? We've got system level metrics. Let's go to town. Anything that looked different in those incidents, spotlight on it. The database went above 65% CPU during that last one, put an alert on it, wake somebody up. So we did that. And it started to look like this. Not all the alerts are pointing in the same direction. And this is what on-call started to feel like. Now we're lucky in that, especially at this time, most of our incidents were coming in during daylight hours, so we're not necessarily waking people up, but we are pulling them off of feature work. And you know what people want to do? They want to build features. So when you're pulling developers off for false positives, that's net loss in the system, as far as I'm concerned. So by May of 2021, as a tech organization, we made an observability commitment. We decided we were going to move away from our old system. It had served us up till this point. Many kudos. We released you into the world. We wanted to standardize tools that everybody could use. right? A lot of new devs, people coming in with preferences from their previous companies. I want to use this, I want to use this, I want to use this. We had to pick one. Focus on what matters, and then invest in asking better questions. Cool, but what does that actually mean? For us, that meant we did have some rudimentary application metrics. Like many folks in the audience, we were using Prometheus, which is great for many, many things. We were attempting to shovel all of our particularly Java application metrics into Prometheus, and it just wasn't getting the job done for us. It was difficult to see how our growing ecosystem of applications spoke to each other, and we ran into issues with a lot of new grads and bootcamp graduates who'd never, looked at app metrics before, and suddenly they had to learn PromQL on top of everything else. And so we had kind of low adoption of developers actually using these tools. Second thing, funnel everything into Honeycomb. This is not a vendor talk, but that's who we decided on. All alerting going through PagerDuty, no more secret alerts being emailed to devs because they didn't want to scare anybody. No, we need to know what's happening. And then 4, aim for a good enough customer experience using service level objectives. If you are further along in your observability journey, kudos. I hope there's some pretty pictures in the talk for you. If you are at the pivot point where you know you need to move and you're scared about how this is going to interact with your growing pile of priorities, this is where I get to tell you it's okay to do it alongside everything else that's already on your plate. We did it. It worked out for us. We ran it in 3 phases, and I will never, ever say crawl, walk, run on stage. So we're going to give them different names. We did implement. This is the most intense, most coordinated phase of our implementation. We needed to make a shift as an organization, so everybody needed to be on board in a relatively tight time frame. Once that was done, we were able to relax some of that coordination. Dev teams during this augment and validate phase were adding custom attributes to things. They were validating against their existing logging and alerting systems to build faith in the system. But none of that work needed to be coordinated across teams per se. So it really reduced the overhead. And then the sunset portion in November, December is literally just my team turning off things that we're not using anymore because we've successfully moved into these unified tools. Another thing to point out for this very first implementation phase on the left is we were lucky enough to sign a 2-week onboarding with Honeycomb when we made the switch. So this did 2 things. We got access to expertise and we got deadlines. And those proved to be invaluable. Kristen, you told me I could do this alongside things, and then you told me that the level of effort at the beginning was high. That's true. We did need to get buy-in. But once we had buy-in and we had this onboarding plan in place with our vendor, we took a week of half days, so roughly 20 hours per team for each of our main teams, and then got a couple of operations folks to help out with, making sure these got deployed okay. For us, that was about 150 hours, because this is the exciting slide. 4 hours is what it took once we actually got all of the smartest people in the same Zoom room. It took 4 hours to auto-instrument our most critical apps and get them all flowing into Honeycomb at the same time. We'd been putting off the move to tracing for at least 6 months because we were worried that this 4 hours, was going to be a stumbling block. And it was so much easier than I thought it was going to be. And if that piece of advice helps anybody that's watching this whole thing will have been worth it. We needed to include the OpenTelemetry Java agent. We needed to make sure that it started up on time and include some things like our Honeycomb API keys so it could actually send things to Honeycomb. And that was it. That's the secret. We just auto-instrumented at the beginning. And we came out with this. This is the Honeycomb UI, if you haven't seen it. Consumer, aggregator, and platform are terribly named internal apps at Campspot. But what you need to know is that this is a web application. Somebody's hitting a web application, and it's running through several different layers of business logic to return the correct information about a campground. No additional massaging required to make these things hold together. So that was implementation. Our augment phase looked like this. We needed to add in some custom attributes. We knew ahead of time what questions we asked all of the time. So when someone says production is running slow, we want to know things like, what park did you hear that from? That helps us figure this out. So we added in things like park ID. We want to know things about the host and client info. Gibbs just gave an incredible talk on why you would maybe want to correlate your system metrics with your trace data. Having host info makes that easier, but also, looking for more advances in that arena in general. And then for us, things like shopping cart UID. So tracing is great because it lets you capture an entire unit of work across your systems. But we found that we actually needed to correlate traces together to represent entire workflows. And for us, shopping cart UIDs were the way to do that. So my goal at the beginning of this process was to be able to figure out what every single individual user was doing at any given time. This is a gratuitous graph. But what you really need to know is that when on March 7th, last week, I was trying to figure out why an account manager got logged out when she didn't expect to, I could go in and find her. And just look up her user ID and figure out what park she was working on at the time, and that's her. That's everything she was doing at the time and how long it took. And that level of granularity and focus on the customer experience let us re-engineer how we were alerting to problems in the system, from resource metrics and alerting to customer experience metrics and alerting. We are no longer working backwards from symptoms. We're going directly to what users are experiencing in the system. I will not say we're here. I will not say this level of clarity is where we are at today. There are definitely still cloudy patches in the system that we're working on, but we're so much closer than we were this time last year. I feel really proud of my team. They took this in stride. We had devs who had never, ever been interested in telemetry suddenly opening pull requests to add information. So I think from a tech side, we did great. But that fourth bit, that fourth tactic of moving us towards a shared understanding of what is a good enough customer experience is maybe where we hit a stumbling block. And maybe some of this will help you approach your implementation with a little more wisdom. Here's the second fact for your Tuesday. Maybe it'll show up in trivia one day. 30 minutes is how long it takes the average healthy human eye to adjust from being in a light place to being in a dark place. If you are in the habit of stargazing, or even if you're not, if you walk outside from this room and the lights are real bright from up here, you look up at the sky, even in a cloudless, non-polluted sky, you'll see very few stars. And then if you wait 5 minutes, you'll see a few more. And what's happening during this time frame is that the tiny muscles in your iris, that beautiful colored part of your eye, are slowly contracting and opening up your pupil to allow more light into the back of your eye. It is dangerous to open your pupil too quickly. There's a reason you can't do that of your own accord, is your body doesn't trust you. I think there's something to be said for how moving towards this sort of dark sky observability needs to be approached in the same way. You might not be hurting your eyes, but you're definitely hurting your brain. So case in point, I set up the second week of this Honeycomb implementation, which was supposed to be our SLO workshop. And I was so excited with myself. Like, Kristen, you're doing so good. You're so good with people. Like, you're doing this like cross-team collaboration thing. You're gonna have salespeople and account managers and devs, and everybody's gonna be really excited to work together to figure out what our service level objectives are. And that's maybe not what happened. Just maybe not quite how that went. Because all of the salespeople got in the room and said, "What do you mean we're not talking about uptime?" And that's not their fault, right? One, we operate in a world in where a lot of the customers were coming in directly asking that question. What is your uptime? And they wanted an answer for it. Totally understandable. We talked about this timeline earlier, and I lied. I lied directly to your faces, and I'm so sorry. But I didn't even realize I was lying to myself at the time, because there's a fourth phase to our implementation, which I'm going to call adjust. These are all of the months leading up to our tech commitment to moving away from our learning and monitoring system towards an observability system, where we were having conversations that were leading up to service level objectives. We did not necessarily have the language at the time, but we were talking about what is the acceptable level of failure? What is good enough performance? What is important to our customers? And all of those things play into how you construct a good SLO. And so our tech side, including some of our product owners, were completely on board. But we had neglected to have those conversations with our account managers and our salespeople until they came into our workshop at the end of May. I'm so sorry. And I think I have time for this joke. Here's a fun fact about me. Before archiving, I tried to do sales, door-to-door sales. I walked into an insurance agency to sell them printer ink, and I walked out with a life insurance policy. You cannot make that up. I am not a natural salesperson, so even though I really, really, really believed that this was the move for us, had I started with our sales team and said, "Hey, I know you don't necessarily care about like how all of the sausage is made, but we are thinking about moving towards a system where we make agreements with our customers that tell them exactly what we want to offer them for each of these workflows instead of just uptime," that team would have taken it and sold it to every single customer before we even signed a deal with Honeycomb. And I seriously missed out on capitalizing on some internal expertise at our company. So my advice here is very simple. If there are people outside of your tech org that would be stakeholders, that would contribute to developing your SLOs, get them involved way earlier than you think you need to. And the last thing I'll say on this is we are actively working against a psychological problem that we have created. Please tell me, actually no, you can just hold this in your heart. If you've ever been involved in an incident and the outcome of that incident to some stakeholder was, we know we had an incident, we added more monitoring, you are part of the problem along with me. Because what this does is it ties the idea of monitoring and alerting to the ideas of safety, prosperity, and people's job security. And then when we attempt to change that in any way, shape, or form, we have to battle that association. And again, we can learn a lot from the dark sky movement, right? One of the most frequently raised points when we talk about dealing with light pollution and turning down outdoor lighting is public safety will suffer. And some of that's true, and some of that is grossly exaggerated. So we need to be careful when we talk about turning down alerting, that we are very, very, very clear that we are not trying to go back to cloudiness. We are not trying to go back to not understanding what's in our system. We are not trying to go back to a point where we are not responding to customer needs. We are just trying to turn it down enough to focus what we're illuminating on what is most important and not just on things that are symptoms. Because the most powerful part about turning this down is that once you can actually see what's happening, you can start to tell stories. So now our data points get to be shared stories between all of our teams, between our developers and our product owners and our account managers, I get to end. I'm so lucky to get to end with a different version of this campfire story. So this is a true story. It happened the last weekend before Memorial Day last year. If you're unfamiliar, Memorial Day is the high water mark in the camping industry. It is the weekend of the year that campgrounds make the most money. And so leading up to that, after an early summer with some outages, we did a couple of things. We scaled up our on-call account managers. We had a couple engineers who volunteered to be on call over that weekend. And we really set the expectation that, yes, we're going to pay attention to our automated alerting, but if an account manager should hear anything, please talk to the developers. We hadn't fully developed confidence in the system yet, and we wanted to have a catch in place. So it's early Saturday, and an account manager opens a ticket, and the on-call engineer opens the ticket, and the ticket reads something like, hey, Susie Q at Park 55 reported a little bit of slowness when she went through this workflow at roughly this time frame. I'm unable to replicate, but could you just check? I just want to make sure going into this weekend that we're doing good. And the on-call engineer was able to find that user at that time and then extrapolate that against the rest of the data in the system. Is her experience correlated with everybody else's? Is she an exception? And right back to the account manager and says, hey, I was able to find Susie. She did have a little bit of a slowdown between such and such time and such time. Two things here. It looks like it's resolved. It's also within our SLO, so I'm not going to do anything right now, but we will keep an eye on it. And also, it doesn't seem to have affected anybody else in the system. So we had a very minor blip in latency that would have affected this workflow right around this time frame. We've got plenty of air budget left. I'm not going to wake anybody else up. Maybe we'll talk to the the product owner when we meet up on Monday and see if we need to adjust that SLO. Maybe it needs to be a little bit more restrictive. Maybe we missed a customer experience understanding here. And they closed out the ticket. And we came in on Monday, and everything was fine. So that's a boring story, but what's really helpful for me is we were able to find an individual user. The account managers and the devs were able to speak to each other intelligibly because there's enough granularity in the data that things like, hey, I'm looking for this user at this park are now possible to see. And there was a set threshold for what was good enough customer experience and what wasn't. So they knew whether to rally the troops or whether this was a teeny tiny blip in a much bigger picture. And that is my version of success. If you'd like to connect with me or figure out what's happening at Campspot, these are the links. And if none of this seemed relevant to you, but you are interested in the dark sky movement, darksky.org. Thank you so much.